Back to another weekly GMBN Tech show. As you can see, things here are a little bit different to usual because we have a Henry. We've got a brand new GMBN Tech presenter. We're going to get to him in a minute. We've also got some really cool stuff related to the World Cup, a new bike from Alchemy, and of course, some really cool stuff from Ibis out in Santa Cruz. Okay, so before we get into news, let's talk to Henry. So, of course, Henry, you've been doing some videos for us already, a bit of moonlighting, I guess, before you even started.
Yeah, they put me to work straight away.
Yes, out in the road to
Yeah, out in the road to the Crankworks, and yeah, hopefully be able to kick out some bits and bobs. I think there was a few bike checks and stuff, which is actually really cool to do. But no, it's great to be back in Old Blighty. In the studio.
So you say back in Old Blighty. So what we know currently about you is you've been a mechanic on the World Cup scene and you've been residing out in New Zealand. So tell us a bit about your background.
So I've been doing summers since 2011. So just hopping between New Zealand and Europe.
Nice.
And that eventually started tying in really nicely with the European race season. In the past I've worked predominantly on World Cups, but started off this season in Rotorua working for Nuke-Proof Chain Reaction, which was a bit different working the Enduros, but yeah, super exciting. And yeah, just wrenching, twiddling the spanners, trying to remember.
What sort of stuff? Tell us a bit more techie about.
So, at the World Cups, I'd usually work with just the one rider.
Yeah.
And often the World Cups themselves was actually like kind of almost once the racing happened, it's actually almost a shade calmer compared to the long test camps you'd be doing, all the travelling and stuff. And that sometimes when you got into the really intense stuff was when you just sat up at maybe Fort Bill or wherever you are, just lapping up runs, small changes.
That's got to be stressful.
I find it really satisfying. It's like a puzzle, and it's really good idea. Really having that person to bounce ideas off.
Okay. And so you don't find the races sometimes a bit prima donna-ish?
The guy I was working with last season, Kenta Gallagher, is the least prima donna-ish person.
Well, what a background he's had. So he went from being an XC pro, didn't he, to switch to downhill.
But he's just an incredible bike handler. He can do on anything.
Yeah.
Although saying this, he does have prima donna. It's always white shoes. If you watch him ride, he's often got white 510s with white socks.
Got to look after your look. Yeah. It's not about what you sound like, it's about how you look at it.
Yeah, that's it.
So what sort of stuff were you doing on the bikes? Were you doing overall bike servicing? Was it suspension stuff?
I mean, I always thought working on races, I think the mechanic sometimes has a more kind of intimate relationship with the bike than the racer.
Of course,
they just ride routine kind of like night and day. So you have in your head, you'd always have like a little rolling service chart about what was coming up, what needed doing. And so over a weekend, you'd just be, so like... I kind of do pretty much like a lower leg, pretty much every day really.
Yeah.
Frame rebuilds constantly, and you just fall into a rhythm, and it was always, like I said, it's strange because the mechanic spends so much time on the bike, and no matter how long of a time you're given, you will use all the time preparing the bike. Even if there's nothing to do, there'll always be something, and then the huge host of spares you get coming with the World Cup team, you're constantly tending to something or other.
I can predict the future here on GMBN Tech. I can see we're going to do a lot of behind the scenes stuff now that Henry's joined us. I'd love to know a bit more about this stuff, but what I want to do actually is throw this out to the viewers for a minute. And what do you want to know about Henry, and what do you want Henry to make as his first video here on GMBN Tech?
Well,
get that one involved underneath in the comments, and we'll pick that one up before next week's show. But no, seriously, dude, I'm really stoked you're here.
No, it's good.
Thank you for coming and joining us. I definitely feel that you're a great fit, and we're going to do a bit more getting to know Henry in another video soon. Okay, so let's go straight into news, and of course we've just had the first round of the World Cup at Maribor in Slovenia. And most notably for me, of course, is the fact that we've seen the return of twin wheel sizes on a bike with Loic Bruni taking a win on that Specialized, which we've seen kind of creeping up on Instagram, I think, here and there.
Yeah, they kind of were hiding it, but flashing a bit of ankle sort of thing.
Yeah, some data logging stuff on there. Yeah. In fact, actually, have you used much of that stuff in the teams you've worked with?
Data acquisition. Yeah, bits and pieces. With Suntour, they're really big on it.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing with data acquisition is it's only as valuable as your interpretation of the data is.
Yeah, of course. And it sounds like Specialized take that pretty seriously with all respects.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, it's kind of was perhaps a bit above my pay grade. I can kind of interpret it a bit.
Yeah.
But they're doing it to such a finite and accurate thing, I think I can probably help just to sound off ideas.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting when you see the engineers come in, because what they're trying to do is essentially talk about balance and they have accelerometers on the handlebars and at the axle.
Yeah.
And they will basically sense feedback and axle paths and all that sort of thing. And they kind of almost make the bike unbearably firm a lot of the time.
Yeah, I get it.
And
so that makes it quick.
Makes it quick.
Yeah.
It's sometimes not a place the rider would tend to gravitate towards in terms of setup.
Yeah. But I guess to ride a bike like that, you've got to be pretty flipping strong.
Yeah.
Bruni, obviously, you can tell he's in shape at the moment. And that bike, in fact, I noticed a lot of the bikes looked really firm.
Mm-hmm.
Like firmer than usual, and it did seem like a pretty rough, fast track.
Yeah, it seemed to be one of those tracks that had those kind of the nightmare for suspension, just those horrible compressions.
Yeah.
Not just square hits,
just
both
huge
wheels.
impacts the whole way down, it looked like, to be honest.
And you even saw like Gwyn and stuff who have their bikes, you know,
immensely firm.
Horribly, just way too firm, bottoming out like front and back. Just So it's pretty impressive. I think also not only do you have to be really strong, but it's just, you know, all those years of, you know, these guys, some of them riding BMX and stuff when they're younger, just being so smooth on the bike. Because when you're actually very smooth on the bike, then you're not, you know, you're kind of blipping through the rough stuff anyway.
Yeah, and some riders have definitely got that smoother style more naturally.
Totally.
I get it, rather than being brutish about it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting about the wheel sizes because it's not a new thing. We've seen this a lot over the years.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you said earlier actually when it was Trek that did it with the 69, wasn't it?
Gary Fisher.
So that was the 26 and the 29. I mean, those things looked awful, but apparently they rode quite well. And in fact, someone who's going to be watching this right now who works with us, I won't say his name out loud, he still has one.
Oh yeah.
A guy that gave you an induction this morning. Yeah, he's still got one, the brown one, I think, the Maverick fork on it.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. But,
you don't see enough brown bikes, do you?
No, you don't see many
why
brown
did that
bikes.
stop?
But seriously, the mixed wheel size is definitely an interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big 29er lover, and it's very clear 29s in a straight line on a rough track is going to go marginally quicker, but it's not about that. It's about how the bike is going to be ridden, and very clearly there is an advantage to be had. We see Martin Mays win successfully at Rotorua, which of course you were out there for that. I mean, he'll win on anything. The right rider will win on anything. But I think it's pretty interesting because it's able to have that front wheel to roll over stuff and the rear wheel to tuck under a little bit, I guess, and retain that manoeuvrability. And of course, Rachel Atherton, another bit of new news. She didn't win, but actually, I think her not winning was actually just a pretty significant result. So, silver medal on a brand new, unproven bike, which was also 29s, I think, wasn't it, front and rear?
And you see how, because you think when they're kind of, I suppose their contract with Trek kind of wound up, they haven't had that much time of testing.
No, I almost don't think enough time to start a season. Yeah,
and so, you know, you look at some brands, and we're going to get into this in a bit, undoubtedly, that have their prototype stages for such a long time.
Yeah.
And just by limitation of being tied to another brand, it's pretty remarkable.
Gone straight in.
Straight in. I think that is testament to not only what a great team they must have, but also their input and knowing what they like is such a valuable thing.
I think they very clearly know their setup and what they want on a bike, but I'm not surprised, to be honest, to see Rachel up there, but I think it's really, really cool to see that.
Yeah.
Also at the World Cup was that Cannondale getting his first proper outing.
Very exciting.
Now, I think I'm through to the video in last week's show. In fact, actually, I wasn't even here doing last week's show. I think someone else went to the video in last week's show.
Taking credit.
I saw that on the script. But I did mention it, and it's been floating around. We've seen it with a shock in the upper position, or what appeared to be one, which I think we now know was a spring, and the lower position was a shock absorber.
Yes.
But it looked like it could also run just a shock on the lower position.
I believe so. I think it's not your standard 4-bar with that shock parallel to the down tube.
Yeah.
It's actually reverses and comes back on itself, almost a bit more like, you know, your Mondrakers and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay.
The shock
almost like it's floating almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
It looks really interesting. Now, what I think is so interesting is that, and this isn't, you know, a criticism, but Cannondale with their forks have been telling us that we want everything in one, not like, you know, not isolating
like
the
lefty,
spring the lefty, which is I'm not getting into when the market says otherwise.
Get into it.
And then on the downhill bike, it's they're isolating damping and spring.
Yeah, I get it.
So I mean,
you can have it all in one, or you can have a bike.
Totally. So it just the lack of consistency is peculiar.
Cannondale have got a history of overcomplicating stuff,
and
I don't mean that in a bad way. I think it's fascinating the amount of development that they've put in the obscure bikes, like that old thing like a roller skate. I don't know if you remember that from back in the day, and the Magic motorcycle aluminium thing with rotary springs. They made some weird stuff. But just the two shock thing, they're not the first people to do a bike with two shocks. There's quite a few. Actually, we were having a bit of a laugh about this earlier. The first one I'm going to throw on the screen is this Scott, which has got 2 shocks. But it's also got the saddle, which is about the size of a small boat.
I'm pretty sure it has the same ergonomics of one of those banana floater things you get, like.
Or a rally chopper.
Totally.
And it's got 2 seat posts as well, just to go along with the 2 shocks on there. 2-stage. Do you know much about them? You must have seen them. I thought they might have been from New Zealand, but I always get New Zealand and Australia confused. So this is a pro bike check for Sam Gaze. Mate,
oh no, 2-stage. Sorry, 2-stage is a yes.
They are from New Zealand.
They are actually yes. No, I know which ones they were.
So another interesting concept. Two air shocks, maybe.
I'm trying to think.
I think it was literally one for half the travel and the other firmer for the second half.
Yes, no, that was it. I mean, how to put it like politely. You didn't see many of them around. From what I heard.
Politely moving on then.
Yeah. I don't know. I never rode one.
To be fair, I didn't see too many. There was also, just throwing way back in time, a rewind one, Kestrel Rubicon Comp. Now this had 2 shocks, but this was weird. So it had 1 shock for the top tube to sit on,
right,
for your comfort when sitting down, and another shock to operate the back end, which I had no idea why you would need to do that. But there you go. There's another bike with 2 shocks.
It's funny though, like, all this people kind of say like, oh, everything looks like a session. It's not giving enough credit to all the weird stuff people tried to end up where we landed.
I think we need to do a weird tech video, because there has been. I mean, we're pretty lucky today. With most bikes are pretty good. You got to try. I always say you got to try pretty hard to find a bad bike. Yeah. But it wasn't too long ago where it was really hard to find a good bike. So much bad stuff. Yeah, we'll do a funny tech video. Now, whilst you've been on a plane, hopping all the way over here, I've actually been on the same plane, or a similar plane, coming back from, wouldn't be the same plane, would it? Coming back from Sea Otter.
My geography's pretty basic, but yeah.
So out at Sea Otter, we saw some really cool stuff. As you'd imagine, put up a few videos, but we saw a couple of cool bikes just before Sea Otter on the way down there. We got tipped off by Alchemy Bikes and also by Ibis to check out a couple of new bikes. So the first one you'll see on screen is the brand new Alchemy Arctos, but this is the 29er version and it's a short travel. So it's 120 out back, 140 up front, comes in 4 sizes, made from carbon. It's got that Cine suspension system out back, which was developed by Dave Earle. Dave, in case you don't know, he worked on early VPP stuff with Santa Cruz. He worked to Specialized. He's been around the bike. He's a bit of an industry vet. This is a really well refined suspension system. It's actually fairly similar, and I think he worked on some of the Yeti stuff as well. A few other things about the bike. The reach varies from 421 up to 485, and basically a suspension platform on it. It's quite interesting. It starts regressive, it gets progressive in the middle third, and then actually backs off again. That's their aim at trying to give you a bit of a bottomless feel of the suspension. But there you go, that's their new bike. It retails for $2,999 in US dollars, and complete builds are from $4,899. They also do a custom program. You can have it pretty much in any colour you can imagine or you can think of.
Let's bring back Pooh Brown.
You can have Pooh Brown. You can also have a gold head tube badge if you want. Really? Now, in fact, while we were over there, they were telling us about one of the road frames that was custom painted, and it was some guy in Saudi Arabia, like some prince, ordered this thing. It was like a 40k paint job, but he didn't stump up for the gold head tube badge. Oh. Cheapskate.
What? Outrageous.
And the other thing I actually saw was this new Ibis bike. So Scott Nichol, he's the owner of Ibis, he invited me to pop round there for a cup of coffee and to check out a new bike. What I didn't realise was it was a full-blown media day. And turned up there and he was like, it's a bike, you're an XL, like this. It was like, so I actually got to go and ride a bike for a day, which is a bit unusual on these sort of things because we tend to just go and report on the stuff. It's a super cool bike. It's called the Ripley. It's a 4th generation of it, but it's a little bit different to the previous ones. I'd say it's more like a shrunken down Ripmo. So check this out and see what you think. Okay, so we're here in Santa Cruz at the Ibis Cycles headquarters. In fact, we're in the museum, which we're going to get to in a minute. But firstly, I want to just tell you a little bit about their brand new Ripley. Now, the Ripley was always their buzzing trail bike. Now, this is the 4th iteration of that. And as you can probably see, it's quite a big bike. Now, this one is a size XL. Already had a go on this particular bike. 29-inch wheels, 120mm travel via the DW Link system out back, 130mm on the front, a little bit more party up there. Now the nearest thing you could compare this to would be the Ripmo, which of course is their EWS race bike. Think of this now as more a compact, more trail friendly version of that, as opposed to a trail version of their XC platform, which they've previously had. Now it's a very stiff back end on here. It's all been slightly modified and they've stripped off ½ a pound off the total weight of the bike. So for a size medium, you're looking at £5 without a shock on there. That is like an insane weight saving. Now, one of the things they've done, they've taken 100 grams of weight just by taking out bearings in places where they're not that suitable. For example, on the lower DW link, it's running bushes. The reason for that is the rotation is minimal. And of course, with bearings, if you use minimal rotation, they get notchy very quickly, especially if you're riding in wet and gritty weather. Now, the major link at the top here, this is still running a cartridge bearing, so there's a lot of motion on that. And the clevis joint at the top here is running bushings, which drives that shock there, delivering that 120mm travel. Out back is boost 148mm, nice and simple standard. Chainstay length is slightly shorter now, it's 432mm. And on a bike like this, it makes it feel really, really agile. Now, angles are something else interesting. Up front, bearing in mind it's only a 130mm fork in there, it's running 66.5-degree head angle. And the seat angle, this is the really cool bit, it's much steeper now at 76 degrees, which of course puts you in a far better position for climbing those really steep, arduous climbs. This bike, fun uphill, fun downhill, look at the thing, it just looks fast sat here. Now, after the original Ripley was launched, they had the second generation, which is known as the Ripley LS, so long and slack. And of course, it was long and slack, I guess, compared to a lot of other bikes at the time, but it wasn't really long and slack in my eyes. Now the fourth generation genuinely is long and is pretty slack for that sort of 120mm platform. So this is a size XL, it's running about 500mm reach. The large is running about 475 on there, so it's a really good roomy bike. If you consider, it wasn't too long ago that most extra large bikes were running around 470mm reach, so it's quite progressive geometry if you consider that. Also notice running a nice stumpy stem, it's a 40mm stem on this particular model, and also the seat tube height of all the bikes is lower. So on the size large, it's running a 16.5-inch seat tube. On the XL, it's running a 19-inch seat tube. The idea is that you can size up and you can run the next size up if you want that even longer feel bike. Of course, for me at the top end, running the XL is actually perfect, especially with the big 180mm drop bike yoke seat post that's on there. Now check this out, this is called the Sasbo. So this came out in 1995, it's got a unified design, which effectively means when you're stood up on the bike, it feels like a rigid or a hardtail bike. And when you're sat down, basically cantilevers in the middle there, gives you that suspension effect. Of course, at the time, it was all about having some suspension for comfort before performance, and then basically trying to work around it to make it feel like not like a suspension bike. Now, they also did a titanium version of this, which came in 1998, and this one was called the bow tie. Now, the coolest thing about the bow tie, in fact, this is the bow tie, you can start seeing some shots of it now, it doesn't have a pivot at all. The bike flexes. You've got that big bow in the middle of the bike there, and it enables up to 5 inches of travel with that Fox Alps shock on the back. And even that is a piece of kit history there. Now also, I just noticed another cool retro bike up here. Now this one's called the Silk Tie. So this is kind of similar to the original version of the Ripley. So you can see it's got flexi chain stays on the back there. And of course, it's got the shock built into the frame, titanium, naturally flexible, so actually quite a supple rear end on there. There's also a few other amazing relics in here. So just over here is the first carbon bike ever made, back from 1988. So it's got carbon mainframe tubes and they're bonded into these beautifully made lugs. Look at that, from 1988. How far ahead of a time were they? Making carbon in 1988. Bonkers. Ibis have literally done everything. And look at this, look at the paint job on this thing here. So he's got IRD roller brakes on there. I think they're roller brakes, something like that. Unforgivable U-brake position, mind on the underneath there. And then right behind you there is one of the original Mojos, so look at this. That's where the game really started changing with the first iteration of the DW link that they started using. In fact, this particular one was early enough that it didn't even have the Brian Lopes race link on there. So Tech of the Week this week is a little bit different, and again, this is something that I spotted when I was over in Santa Cruz at the Ibis factory. Now, lurking around the back of all those nice new Ripley bikes, I couldn't help but notice some stuff that looked like a carbon moulding setup, and I did remember that they basically 4 years ago they started doing some US production Now, the US production wasn't actually to sort of just bring production to the US. Ultimately, it was so they could refine production and hopefully make it a better process that costs less money, takes less energy and takes less time to produce the same quality finished item. Now, they started doing it with a size small frame, and in the future I think they're hoping to do this with all size frames, and I think they're hinting at the fact that there's a new bike coming, even though they've just launched this new bike. So earlier in the show I referred to Kestrel bikes, that monstrosity with the twin shocks. Basically, the first carbon monocoque bike was made by Kestrel. I think I said 88, it might be an 88 or 89. And Ibis used the original guys that developed that. Now, the cool thing about this is these guys came from the aerospace engineering world, basically, so very different to the mountain bike sort of engineering side of things, and they're now making the Ibis carbon stuff. Now, the way they've refined the carbon manufacturing is really interesting. So the typical way a carbon frame is manufactured is you have this huge steel mold, and they have basically the carbon is laid up inside it around like a bladder, if you like, and then the whole thing is shut and it's pressurized and baked inside a massive oven.
It's similar to what you would have seen in, I think it was Neil's video at the Continental Tyre Factory.
100%.
Those big casts, it's similar
exactly
sort of
that, yeah. And it takes an immense amount of heat to basically bake these things. It takes a lot of time. The laying up process takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of parts, about 300 parts for a frame, just for front triangle, that is.
Okay.
Now, what Ibis are now doing is they've got an aluminium version of this mould, and the mould itself heats. So it doesn't have to be transported into an oven.
Right.
It uses far less energy and it uses far less parts, about 100 parts. And the reason for that is they also have their own carbon sheet cutting sort of jig, I guess you'd call it. And this thing precisely cuts the exact amount needed, so there's no wastage. And the whole point is it takes less time, takes less energy, it makes a better frame for the environment, it makes everything about it is better. Now I've seen some carbon fibre moulds in the past, but I've not seen one that looks like this. Now, you've already told me it's made from aluminium rather than steel, and there's lots of other stuff going on. If you could tell me a bit about this process, that'd be super cool.
Sure. I think the driver with the mold material here is that it's typical, especially in Asian factories, but all around the world. The molds are made out of steel, CNC machined steel, and they're quite heavy, but they're made to be put into presses or sometimes ovens, not commonly autoclaves, but usually it's a big press, a heated press. You roll a big heavy steel mold in there, close the press down and cure it out. Well, in our case, we really want to be more energy efficient as well as just make things a little more kind of human scale manageable in terms of the size and the weight of the mold. So we use CNC aluminum for these molds, and it's actually a little difficult to see, but even the back sides of the molds are machined out to just minimize the mass that we have to heat up and process. So the biggest driver for using aluminum is the efficiency of heating up and cooling down. And because we didn't want to use a press or an oven, the mold is completely self-contained. So you can see these wires actually are going to electric cartridge heaters that are placed throughout the mold. There are some thermocouples here, a couple thermocouples in each half of the mold. And actually, if it'll come out easy
so this
enough,
whole mold
it'll actually
heats
come
up.
out here, and that's just a sensor to measure the temperature in the mold.
Yeah. And what sort of time are we talking to make like a frame?
So for laying up, actually, it's a fairly complex process, and well, I can go through more of the details of that later. But from start to finish of the layup, when you're starting out with mandrel and bladder preparation to closing the mold, is about 2 hours or a little bit less. Okay. And contrast that to, say, a typical Asian factory production where they usually have more people doing smaller steps or stages at a time, and it'll take about twice that amount of time for the layup.
Wow, so it is really quite efficient then to work this way.
A big driver of that has to do with our, we use an automated cutting machine. So we do a lot of the work up front to prepare everything so that when it comes time for the actual layup process, it goes quite quickly. So where we lay up maybe, say, around 100 separate pieces of carbon fiber epoxy that are pre-cut, A lot of frames in Asia would use separate layers, separate strips or rectangles of the material, and they might have 300 or 400 pieces that they have to put down in the layup. So
Wow.
we're in the U.S. It costs more to manufacture. We need to be efficient at it. We're going to tend to have a small number, in this case about 2 people, that are very highly trained and more skilled people doing the layup. And then we, like I said, we do more of the engineering and the material prepping and cutting up front so that it goes together fairly quickly, actually.
Now, the thing I think I really love about the whole process is that Ibis is sharing this information back to the Taiwanese factories and the Asian factories, because they want everyone to make a better frame. It's not just about what they're doing, they're about the bigger picture. It's really interesting to see what they've done and where they're going with it. Well, there we go. There's another weekly GMBN Tech show in a bag. A little bit of a strange one this week. It's a bit of a mixed content. Some we've already shot, and of course some new stuff with you, Henry.
First day at school.
Yeah, 100%. For a couple more great videos, what you got for us over there?
So this week you can see my bike check with maybe the nicest man in mountain biking, Elliot Jackson.
Oh, he's hilarious.
He is just the absolute dude.
He's a great guy.
Yeah, so click down here for that one there.
Yeah, click down here if you want to see how a tyre is made from tree to trail, the whole process. Very geeky video, that one. Get your specs on for that one. As always, don't forget to give us a huge thumbs up here at GMBN Tech. Hopefully you love what we're doing, and let us know in the hashtags below anything you want to know about Henry. Use a hashtag AskHenry. Get that down there, get involved, and we'll pick it up in next week's Ask.